orders of the Mao Mao, this oath will kill me. If I am called in the night and refuse to come, this oath will kill me. If I see anyone steal white man's property, I must help him. I must hide what he gives me and say nothing, or this oath will kill me.
The whole system in this country, the economic system, is such that jobs are scarce. Automation is limiting jobs. It's decreasing jobs. And as automation eliminates the job opportunities, legislation will not create job opportunities. All it will do is bring about friction and hostility between the two races.
You see, there will be no progressive revival if black folks are not deeply involved in it.
I will obey all orders of the Mao Mao, or this oath will kill me.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Mao Mao Hour, usually starring my homie, my dog, our co-host, Pascal Robert, but Ramadan wiped him out, and he will be resting for a while. And in the great spirit, this is Revolution of Pascal Robert, we want to keep the show going. But you can't just have anybody fill in the Mao Mao Hour. I can't fill it in. I'm too nice. Too cordial. We need someone that's really going to Mao Mao the bourgeoisie, which is Djene Bajalan's child gets on the phone with us and he sees Pascal and he says, "Hi, Pascal, Mao Mao the bourgeoisie." Totally serious. His 3-year-old says that. So the image, people were guessing who the person was. Some people on Twitter guessed that's got to be Ben Burgess because of the hair. I have to admit, that image is a stock image I took from the internet. The person coming on is not that image. There is one guess by M. Toussaint. Does anyone else have a guess before I bring the Mao Mauer of the hour in? Michael Albert, good guess. You want to know what, Dimitri? Real talk. Michael Albert crossed my mind. I thought about it for 1 second because I was actually kind of nervous to ask the guess. I was like, maybe Albert would do it. I was like, no, Michael Albert isn't Mao Maui enough. So let's bring in the Mao Mauer of the hour. Still to this day, our most, what someone said, AOC. It is not. It is not AOC or Ben Burgess. The Mao Mauer of the hour is the Norm Finkelstein. Norm. Good evening.
How are you?
I'm doing great. I was being very honest. I was actually a little nervous to ask you because to fill in for this show is kind of a big deal for us because Pascal has done such a masterful job of it. And it's become a fun thing for us to do here at This Is Revolution. And your name popped in my head first, but I was like, nah, I don't want to bother him. It's kind of late. And then I thought about it some more. I was like, nope, I'm just going to go for it. The worst he can say is no. And you said, okay. And I was like, oh boy.
The worst I could have said is, I don't know who I am. I'm approaching that age.
Oh, don't you worry. I will be in New York in June, And I will put together any sort of concoction of medicines and vitamins to make sure that doesn't happen. We got to milk as much out of you as we can. There's a lot of knowledge in that mind. There's a lot of wisdom there that we need.
My late father lost his mind. At that point, they couldn't diagnose it, so they gave it this generic title, organic brain syndrome, because they knew it wasn't Parkinson's, it wasn't Alzheimer's, they didn't know quite what it was, so they called it organic brain syndrome. And the episode, there were many macabre but still funny moments. The moment I remember most vividly was my father had a home attendant because we didn't want my father to be in a nursing home. That was not an option.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I'm over at his place, which by the way is my place. This is where I live now. This was my father's place. And the home attendant is sitting next to him. He calls her over to him as I'm sitting there, and then in a whispering voice, he says, "Never trust a home attendant. They steal everything." And she just looked at me as if she didn't know what he just said.
Mm-hmm.
It was funny.
Did you check her pockets on the way out?
If you can get a dime past my father and mother, you earned it. You earned it.
Well, I want people to know the phone lines are open, much like we do usually on the Malma Hour. Nothing is changing, just special guest hosts. It's the only thing that changes, just special guest hosts. So the phone lines are still open if you guys want to call. But, Norm, you wanted to talk about Russia-Ukraine, unless you changed your mind.
No, I'm not committed to it. I just thought if you want to begin that way, but if your viewers prefer just to throw questions at me, that's fine. Whatever you prefer.
I haven't been following Russia-Ukraine as close as other members of the show has, because as the show has gotten bigger, there's other things that I have to constantly read on and prepare for.
Let's just wait for your viewers and your listeners and hear what they want.
But I did watch. Do you know Alfred McCoy?
Well, I know him by reputation. In my era, his famous book was The Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia. And that was a very well-received book. He then went on to write a couple of other books which had a certain amount of notoriety. One on the new manifestations of torture, which personally I found a weak book. And then he wrote a book on the Philippines, the counterinsurgency that the U.S. launched against the Philippines in the early part of the 20th century, a chapter that's completely vanished from history. The estimates when I studied it were about 1 million Filipinos were killed. Now, I don't know what the current estimates are. And that book I understood was very good, and I regret not having read it. If, right now I have to gear my reading to what I'm teaching, and most of the subjects I teach are pretty new to me. So it means doing a voluminous amount of background reading just to prepare. And American history or American politics hasn't figured in my teaching agenda. So I've not read it, but I understand that was a very good book. And I kind of regret I haven't read it. I'd be curious. The counterinsurgency in the Philippines was a dress rehearsal for Vietnam. I mean, you just couldn't help but be struck at how everything that happened in the Philippines then happened in Vietnam. What's astonishing about the Philippines and Vietnam is the capacity, not by the the Americans, but by the actual indigenous populations, their capacity for historical amnesia. If you talk to a Filipino, I've had many Filipino students about that war, and as I said, it was basically Vietnam on a slightly smaller scale. It was ghastly. They have no idea. They think America is the greatest thing since sliced bread. If you talk to Filipinos, no knowledge whatsoever of that chapter in their history. And oddly, and this is kind of, I have to say, it is a little painful for me. The same thing happened with Vietnam. You know, the United States' main ally now in Southeast Asia is Vietnam.
Mhm.
And the fact that the United States was never called to account by the Vietnamese for what happened. You're obviously way too young to remember. I mean, Vietnam, it just permeated the whole of American society. You couldn't have a dinner conversation which didn't come around to Vietnam, and it usually was quite heated.
Well, let me ask you this. This is I think this is going to go very well into questions people have and opinions you have. That era of the quote unquote new left, that we really start hearing about during the Vietnam War, because there's a legitimate anti-war movement. At the same time, there's still civil unrest at home, right? We're still trying to pass civil rights bills. We have farm workers organizing in the Central Valley of California. We have Native Americans trying to repatriate.
The American Indian movement.
The American Indian movement is happening kind of all around this same time.
A lot was happening. There was a civil rights movement. The week I began college was Attica. It was September 1971. So, as I said, the history was not history. It was current. And it was happening at a very rapid pace. Things were changing or horrors were unfolding. And as I said, you know, for me, you know, I'll even forget about Vietnam, which is a painful thing to think that the Vietnamese have let it go, you know, for pragmatic, practical reasons. The United States is a market for Vietnam, and the U.S. wants Vietnam as an ally against China. And the Vietnamese probably legitimately, for historical reasons and maybe even contemporary reasons, have a fear of China.
Mm-hmm.
So I could understand all that, but I'm kind of the never to forgive, never to forget kind of mentality, which I inherited from my parents. So last week 2 weeks ago, I was invited to the Passover Seder of my sister-in-law, and I decided I'm not going to make a scene. I'm going to just play coward for a couple of hours. So I didn't say anything about their comments about Israel, not a word. And then, of course, Ukraine came up. And everybody's expressing outrage at Putin, the monster, the this and the that, the brute, the egotist. I stayed silent. And then a gentleman to my left said in a lower voice, "What do you think about the Ukraine?" And I replied, "I think Russia had a right to attack." Well, at that point, all hell broke loose. If macaroons were lethal weapons, I would be dead. I wouldn't have been able to be on your show because they were looking around for anything to throw at me, and the only thing within arm's distance was a plate of macaroons. chocolate macaroons. They were quite good. Um, and at one point, it got very heated. And I wasn't happy about that. I didn't want to ruin the Seder. I don't want to always be the black sheep, so to speak. I didn't want to ruin the Seder. But at one point, I said, it's very strange to attend a Passover Seder with Jews who are singing the praises of the Ukrainian armed forces that are filled with Nazis. I said, I find that kind of strange.
What did they say then?
What did they say then? Oh, they started to deny they were Nazis.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I can understand why people forget, but I was going to bring it to something that was current for you.
Mm-hmm.
I liked Ketanji Brown Jackson. There was something about her that resonated with me. She had dignity. She clearly worked hard. She earned her place. She was serious. I appreciate all that. I loved her family. Her mother, her father, who, started out pretty much from nowhere, went to, managed to attend college, and the whole thing. It was it's a fairy tale story. It was quite beautiful. But then she starts with, I love the law. You love the law. Well, do you remember that under the law you were a slave for 300 years? You love that law? And then the law where you had Jim Crow for another 100 years. You love that law? And then the law which is incarcerated or implicated in the criminal justice system, 1 out of every 4 young black people. Men, you love that law? And then she kept saying, I love this country. I love this country. Look, we all know she's doing it to get the job. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
But you know what? I'm no saint. I would never do that.
That's why you didn't get the job.
And I teach Supreme Court law.
That's why you can't look, man. They're not trying to have her in there. Every right winger asked her questions about black shit. That was the most ridiculous questions I've ever seen a human get asked. And they were trying to ask this stuff seriously, and she had to keep her composure.
Oh, she was.
Which she did.
She was good at that. I grant her that. I mean, the idea of Ted Cruz interrogating her about her softness on child pornography. Ted Cruz. Now, I ask you a simple question. If there were a police lineup, it comprised only 2 people, just 2 people, Ketanji Brown Jackson and Ted Cruz. And between the 2, you have to choose the pedophile. Is there any doubt? Who would win, hands down? And he's trying to imply, he's trying to suggest, he's trying to insinuate that Ketanji Brown Jackson has a soft spot in her heart for pedophiles. That's positively ill. It's ill. And when I saw that particular, it wasn't one moment, it was several moments with several senators, I thought to myself, this country is finished. Start learning Chinese, because it's over for this country.
That's why I wanted to ask you. I want to ask you real quick. There's a call that just came in, but I want to ask you this real quick. Mm-hmm. Being a part of and being around all these movements that are happening in the 60s and 70s, mm-hmm. like I said, a legitimate anti-war movement, civil rights movement, farm workers organizing.
There was the feminist movement. There were many movements.
Many movements happening to actually kind of scare the ruling class. Why do you think right now we don't have that same movement building? We had a 20-year war in Afghanistan that kind of went quiet. Iraq, for the most part, there was a little pushback initially. Actually, one of the biggest protests of all time happened, and then nothing. Why do you think these past two generations have been so silent or non-able to organize?
I would say, look, that's a very difficult question for me. And I cannot say I've given it the thought that it requires. What I would say is the big change with this generation is it has, for about 80%, it has no future. Now, let me remember the era you're talking about, the 1960s, was a fantastically prosperous period for most Americans. So let me just give you a couple of examples. When I was in college, I can say without any equivocation, that except for pre-meds who had to begin preparing for a medical education the freshman year when they take the intro bio and intro chem, apart from the pre-meds, nobody ever thought about a job. It never came up like, what are you going to do with your life? That just wasn't even a thought. We were in college to explore the world around us and to learn about ourselves. We had stepped out of our parents' homes, and now we were becoming adults. And so we didn't have a care in the world. There was always the certainty, not the possibility. There was the certainty that when you decided what you wanted to do, there would be a job there, a slot there for you. So we had complete, total economic and social security. Schools back then, Bernie Sanders' revolutionary idea, no tuition. None of us paid tuition. It was all free. City University was free. State University was effectively free. The only thing you need was $250 each semester to pay for room and board, which was easy to earn over the summer. So we had no student debt. We had certainty of a job when we graduated, and we had 1,000 options open to us when we were prepared to enter the quote unquote real world. And so we had a huge amount of time in order to do what we wanted to do in those years that we were in college, and also in the years immediately thereafter, before you found your job that you're going to settle into, before you start up a family. And as I'm sure you understand, politics is a lot about time.
Yeah.
You had the time. I'll just give you one more example because I don't want to overdo it. There are people who want to talk. When I was writing my doctoral dissertation, and that was roughly about 1977, I took a very long time for reasons that need not detain us. I worked as a daycare worker in an after-school program. I actually worked with Whoopi Goldberg's mother. Her name was
Oh.
Emma, and she was really a remarkably. She wasn't a remarkable person. She was a remarkably decent person. She worked with little kids. I worked with older kids. She was genuinely a nice person. I have very positive memories of her. And if they weren't positive, I would express them. No, she was very nice. My point here is I worked only 4 hours a day. I worked from 2 to 6. I took the kids when they got out of school. I worked from 2 to 6. In the mornings, I worked on my thesis. And then after work was over, I worked on my thesis. I belonged to the shittiest, if I can use that word, the shittiest union in New York. It was the union for daycare workers, which basically meant non-white women. So you can imagine the kind of power they wielded in our society. Non-white women. That was the union I belonged to.
Does it still exist today, or you don't know?
I'm pretty sure it does, but I can't say for sure.
Gotcha.
But here's my point. We had sick days. We had personal days. We had holidays. We had medical care. We had dental care. We had pension.
Damn.
We got fed because the kids had lunches. And that was the worst union in the city, the worst. And I managed to live on my own, no roommates, on that salary. So you could imagine how prosperous the times were when I got away with virtually doing nothing and living a relatively, not a prince's life, but a decent life. So that's all a way of saying that you can't be surprised that young people nowadays, who would normally be in the vanguard of trying to change society, are so overburdened with sheer survival and so depressed at the prospect that they have no future. They really don't. There's a handful who, in my experience, are making it out, but in general, they're in their 30s. They have 3 roommates. None of them can afford to start up a family. And their jobs are these transient gigs without any amenities, without any of the perquisites that normally come with a full-time job. So I don't fault the young people. We were able to do it because basically we had ample amounts of free time and we had a lot of things that were free. They were free.
As far as information and the way information was getting out to people, how would you look at that compared to now?
Oh, impossible to compare. Because in my opinion, 2 main factors. Factor number 1, people back then did read.
I want to also qualify that question by saying, when I watch interviews with students, as I make a lot of these video essays, I found a ton of interesting archives of student conversations, and not just all SDS. Everyone seems to be extremely informed on what's going on, not just in Vietnam, but in the outlying countries, basically all of Southeast Asia. Everyone knew what was going on with Laos and Cambodia as well. And also you even had some students that would talk about atrocities happening in Africa as well during this same time, because let's keep in mind, Patrice Lumumba gets assassinated in like 64 or so. So the amount of knowledge is very interesting to me. That's why I ask, like, what were people reading? What was the news reports like? Because no one has their own partisan news that they can tune into for 24 hours a day.
Well, I think the bigger issue or the bigger factor is that reading back then was looked upon as a thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't scorned and it wasn't marginalized. I remember young people my age who weren't particularly bright. However, they did attempt to write poetry.
Gotcha.
You were supposed to do something literate in my generation. You were supposed to do something literate. There were a certain category of books, which maybe not everybody read, but everybody understood you should have read.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a standard of literacy. Right now I'm teaching. I get occasionally, they throw me a bone, the powers that be in New York academia. And of course, I'm a famished dog running to the bone because I like to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And the students' minds, I'm talking about CUNY, the City University of New York. I'm not talking about Ivy League school.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about CUNY. The students' minds are still nimble. There are wheels turning upstairs. And you can draw their interest if you know how to present the material, which I generally think I'm pretty good at. The problem comes with the writing. The writing is an atrocity. An atrocity. If I were to use the language of international law, I would say it's a crime against humanity. And I have to say, I was grading papers today. There's a student, I like him very much, just a really nice, decent human being. Comes to class punctually, is a lively presence in class. And then he even brings his best friend to class. And then I read his paper today. And I'll just tell you the first words I wrote to him in the back, when I'm presenting the grade. And I didn't grade it. I refused to grade it.
Oh.
I just wrote, "What a disappointment."
Oh.
And but it was a disappointment because I know he's capable of better. Whatever gifts I have, speaking for myself, they came from good schools, good teachers, and hard work. And these young people are immersed in a culture where they think an argument is a tweet. A tweet is not an argument. An argument is not easy to construct. You have to work through the logic and the reasoning in each paragraph to, at the end, be able to pronounce, "I've composed an argument." But this generation, an argument has been reduced to a tweet. And that is a second issue behind the first one, that there's no reading going on in our culture and there's no reading going on in our schools. Nothing. You wanted to tell me, well, something has replaced it? No. One of the problems with the left, in broadly speaking, is this notion that whatever new appears represents progress. Now, a lot of the new does represent progress, but I think it must be said progress comes with a cost. And to only see the progress, that ever upward curve, to only see the progress and not recognize that as there's an upward curve as time unfolds, there's also a downward curve occurring simultaneously, is, I think, a failure of the historical imagination. It's not just upward. You know, the right to divorce, obviously an important right for women to secure, in particular women, not only women, but in particular women to secure. But it must be recognized the main cause of the disintegration of the family has been the right to divorce. Thomas More, in his book, The Utopia, he said, there is nothing more designed to destroy marriage than making divorce easy. Mm-hmm. And I think that's true. I just, grab that example. I can give you 10,000 where you have to see for each step in so-called progress, there is also a step in regress. People think, well, I'm sort of some kind of Luddite nut, because I refuse to get a cell phone, an iPhone. I just have my old landline. It's not stubbornness by me, and it's not because I'm cut from the mold of Gandhi's saintliness. Quite the contrary. I'm painfully aware of my weaknesses. And I know that, like everybody else, if I got that iPhone, I wouldn't be off it. Listen, I'm Jewish. I came from a very competitive lower middle class neighborhood. Mm-hmm. I have ambition and competitiveness in my DNA. Do you know why I've never been on Facebook? Do you know why I've never been on Twitter?
You try not to fight with likes?
What?
You try not to fight and get a bunch of likes?
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. You hit the bullseye. I know in half an hour I would become obsessed by likes and what's the other one? Likes,
the retweets or whatever?
Retweets, whatever. I would be the worst one on the block. I would be getting up at 3 a.m. to check my freaking likes.
Well, we're going to have to cut that segment you just said and share that with a few people that are a little younger than you that are on Twitter that probably shouldn't be on Twitter.
So that's my point. I can assess the progress and the regress, and I reached a conclusion for me, myself, on balance, stay away from the progress. Stay away because it's going to have a personally detrimental impact. It will be not good for me. I won't get anything done. I won't get any work done.
So, well, let's take a call. We have a call coming in. Let's see here. Make sure we get it. All right. Strom, can you hear me?
I can indeed.
Thank you for holding. What do you have to
Absolutely.
ask? What do you have to ask for our guest Mau Mauer of the hour, Dr. Norm Finkelstein?
Well, a really quick comment and then a question. My comment is that myself, I'm so woke that my pronouns are it and it. But the question I got is,
The pronouns are what?
it and it.
It.
What is his pronouns?
It.
It and it?
Uh-huh. But I but my question is, how does Dr. Finkelstein think that the improvement in relations between some of the Gulf Arab and China and Russia will affect the larger global political scene?
Well, can you say it again, Strom? I couldn't understand the last thing you said.
How the improvement in relations between some of the Gulf Arab and Arabian Peninsula petroleum states, how the improvement in relations between them and China and Russia will affect the larger global political scene.
Well, for the moment, I think it's more timely to speculate on where things are going absent the Gulf right now. Both the U.S. and Russia are not going to stand down because now the investment has been so over the top on both sides that, as many commentators have pointed out, it's very hard to see how it can end, not how it will end. It's very hard to see how it can end. And there are two other aspects which personally, I shouldn't say personally, two aspects which should trouble all of us. One aspect is the US and the Europeans are pouring in so many arms, so much high-tech military armament into the Ukraine, which is a barely functioning society, that it's only a matter of time before the wrong people who are millennials, they want to see Armageddon in this war. They are a very troubling lot of people, and they are deeply represented in the Ukraine military, in particular the militias. The number of troops, or regular troops, is about 125,000. The militias are about 100,000. And those militias are filled with neo-Nazis, crypto-Nazis, and all sorts of lunatic soldiers of war. Now, these high-tech weapons are soon going to be in their hands because now Ukraine is awash in all of these weapons that are being dumped there, but with nobody keeping track of with whom they're going to end up. And it's not difficult to imagine that even if an agreement were reached between Ukraine and Russia, which doesn't seem like it's going to happen, but even if a couple of strategic strikes by these neo-crypto and whatever else Nazis in Russia, the whole thing will blow up again. And then there is no possibility, none, that China will let Russia lose, because China knows it's next. Ukraine today, Taiwan tomorrow. That's the game plan. Ukraine today, push Ukraine filled with Nazis and armed by a hostile military bloc, NATO, push it up to the throat of Russia to force Russia to capitulate to Western fiat. Well, that's exactly what's going to happen next with Taiwan and China. So China, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out China is not going to let Russia lose. And then where that's going to take us, you know, nobody likes to be preaching the doomsday scenario. But I do think, I noted today in an article which I didn't like, but the major point was hard to dispute. We're now at the point, or we're reaching the point, of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara later estimated that we were 1/2 to 2/3 close to nuclear annihilation. 1/2 to 2/3 close to nuclear annihilation. And we're getting there. And the worst part of it is, it's not just the lunatics in power who are pushing us in that direction, but then there are the lunatics with a high exponent out of power who are now being armed with this super cutting edge military hardware. That's very scary. You know, the Azov brigades, the neo-Nazis, they're holed up in the steel plant in Mariupol. It's a very large steel plant, for sure. And I heard the other day it has 8 floors underneath. But still, the Russian army, it's very hard to believe that they can't level it. And in my opinion, and I admit it's pure speculation, but in my opinion, the reason Russia doesn't level the plant is because they know if all the martyrs in the plant are killed, that it'll turn into a shrine for neo-Nazis across Europe. And they don't want to create that neo-Nazi shrine in Ukraine. Those people are crazy. Now, is Biden much better? I'm not really so sure. You know, it's a funny thing, Jason. Mm-hmm. We were all told to vote for Biden because Trump presented an existential threat. I could be wrong. I'm not, you know, nobody could predict in politics. But I very much doubt Trump would have brought us to this point. I don't think so. No, I don't.
You don't? Do you think Putin just doesn't invade?
Look, there was a very easy way to settle this issue. It's been on the table already for 2 decades. It simply required, or I should say a little over 1 decade, it simply required Ukraine agreed to neutralize, that is to say, not to belong to a Western bloc, not to belong to an Eastern bloc, like Austria after World War II. Austria had to neutralize. It used to be said the Austrians pulled off this great trick. They convinced the world that Hitler was German and Beethoven was Austrian. Well, it was the reverse. Austria, yes, it was the victim of what was called the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria by Germany. The Austrians were very happy for that annexation. And because of that, after World War II, they had to neutralize. That was part of their state treaty, neutralize. There was no difficulty with Ukraine neutralizing. That's what Putin kept saying, neutralize Ukraine. They refused. They refused because NATO was egging on Ukraine. From 2014, or I should say 2016, and here Trump was responsible, let's be clear, the Western powers were pouring arms into Ukraine. Ukraine was engaging in joint military exercises with NATO. Ukraine was de facto, a NATO, a member of the NATO pact at that point. So I'm not going to go into the history right now, but I do think, a couple of nights ago, the more I was reading, the more I realized, Norm, sober up. This is really ominous. It's ominous not just because of what can be calculated, namely the United States now openly saying we're going to use Ukraine to weaken Russia, and Russia knowing that either it fights the war in Ukraine or it's going to be fighting the war in Russia. So that's already awful enough. But then when you read the reports that all of these weapons that are being dumped into Ukraine, all of these weapons, nobody knows where they're ending up. Nobody knows where they're ending up. So there's a new factor. This is not weapons in the hands of a disciplined army with command control. No, 100,000 are just private militias. They keep talking about Mariupol. Mariupol is all Azov brigades or Nazis, neo-Nazis, whatever you want to call them. So it's very ominous, very, very ominous what's happening now. And is Biden up for the job? No. He has sophisticated advisors, but people like Blinken, but I think they're crazed. Here's a question. I'm not a big Obama fan, but do I think Obama would have gotten us into this mess? I'll be honest with you, because I try to be fair with the facts. I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
I don't think so. Obama, he kind of likes the good life. And I think he identifies with the idea that war is not a terrific thing. He's got 2 daughters. He likes Hollywood stars. War isn't something that, as it were, turns him on. Now, for some of these people, it is.
Mm-hmm.
They get all excited. They get all excited by the prospect of war. He doesn't strike me as that type at all. I loathe the guy, but credit given where credit due. He's not the type. I think he would have figured out, working with Putin, for a face-saving way to get out of this mess. And a mess, a royal mess it is.
Well, thank you, Strom, for your call. Does that answer your question, Ish?
Absolutely. Well, but I tell you, it was some interesting commentary. I'll say that. I was thinking about the question of natural resource supplies to different, like Europe, how they're going to handle that and all that. But I'll comment on that response by saying, as much as I have no time for any species of Russian national chauvinism, I don't have time for any species of Ukrainian national chauvinism as well. And I think that the fact that the mouthpieces of Western capital are neglecting the fact that there's an actual huge neo-Nazi problem in Ukraine, while there's an increasingly significant neo-Nazi youth culture in Western societies, is it's abhorrent. So that's all I got to say.
Thank you, Strom.
You got it.
Well, also, Strom, we were going to do a show before Derek Varn had got ill, and we were going to do another show on Duginism, because we've done a show. Oh gosh, I couldn't tell you what episode it was, but we did do a show on Duginism. If our wonderful moderator M. Toussaint could find that. We did a show, I think we called it Third or Fourth Positionism, which basically was about what now people are calling Duginism, and definitely we focused on Russia. But if you want some interesting insight into what that is and the rise of a new neo-Nazi movement, check that episode out. It's actually very, very interesting, and the research I did was extremely illuminating on where a lot of this thought comes from and why we're seeing so many young leftists. Norm, I hope you haven't seen this, but maybe you have. Have you seen these young leftists that call themselves socialist patriots?
No, I've actually not.
Or communist patriots. They believe that they are nationalists.
Mm-hmm.
I can't even say it with a straight face. They believe they are nationalist socialists, and they follow the teachings of Alexander Dugin, because Dugin comes out of Marx, and people that don't really do the reading or have any sort of understanding of history just assume that anyone that says the word Marx is a righteous dude. And so there is a small following. They're somewhat loud on the internet. I couldn't tell you how big they were in the real world, but yes, someone wrote Marxist Leninist patriots. They call themselves. It's really, I thought it was a joke at first. I didn't think it was a real thing. They posted something about doing some sort of talk about how Julius Caesar was some sort of proto-socialist.
Where does that leave Cleopatra?
Now, you know what I'm going to do now? I'm going to send you just.
I have new respect for Liz Taylor. After she played Cleopatra. For those in your audience who don't know.
Yes, it's insane. When I saw that, I thought it was a joke, and I immediately I sent it to guys on the show, and no one, they're like, this can't be serious. It's like, it's serious. There's people that are walking around talking about Julius Caesar. He redistributed land.
Well, you remember Patrice Cullors also said she was trained in Marx.
Yes.
She also redistributed land.
Well, we are at our hour. Thank you, Norm, for taking the time to be so generous and hang out with me. I really, really appreciate it. You don't know how much this means. I will give you the biggest hug when I see you in New York in June when I'm down there. Also, I want people to follow Sublation Magazine on Twitter. We will be having the Sublation Magazine launch party Sunday at 9 a.m. my time, because everybody on Sublation, except for me and Doug Lane, are all in the UK. And those people thought that 9 a.m. for me is a good time to want to be up and cheery and host. Luckily, I'm a morning person.
We're all going to be a morning person. MOURNING. We're going to be mourning our own graves.
Give us a message of hope before we log off.
I would say the message of hope is I still manage to enter the classroom once in a while. The young people I have the across the board 80%, not the 20% who are making it, the 80% who are not. They're of every nationality, they're of every sex, they are of as representative of as a sample of people as you can get. And down to the last, they're genuinely decent, genuinely kind, genuinely considerate, and smart. All the institutions in our society collaborate and collude to dumbify those 80%. They give themselves the best education on God's earth, but the 80%, they do everything in their power to dumbify, and to the eternal resilience of the human species, they still remain mentally nimble, lively, and I hope and pray they find it in themselves to organize and to get rid of this rotten, rotten, rotten system. Okay.
You've heard it from Norm Finkelstein. Dr. Norm Finkelstein, Professor Norm Finkelstein, my friend Norm Finkelstein. Thank you guys very much. Norm, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Everyone, thank you guys so much for joining us. And as you know, we'll be replaying this show for the general public. They just don't get the benefit getting their comments on the screen and calling in. So thank you, patrons, and we are out.